I never really planned to become the one holding everything together. It just sort of crept in. One doctor's appointment, one late-night call, one spilled medication bottle at a time. My father's first fall felt like a warning bell, but I didn't realize it back then. I thought I was just helping out for a while, a temporary patch. But the patch became the foundation, and before I knew it, I wasn't just helping. I was responsible for all of it. My brothers? They meant well, I guess. They called on holidays, sometimes sent flowers for Mom's birthday. But they had their own lives, big jobs, faraway cities, families. I was here. I was always here. The one chasing down prescriptions, arguing with insurance reps, pushing wheelchairs through hospital corridors under buzzing fluorescent lights. I didn't complain. Not really. I figured someone had to step up, and that someone was me. It's strange how quickly your own life slips through your fingers. I stopped dating. Stopped dreaming. My career stalled somewhere between promising and available for emergencies. Weekends weren't for resting. They were for sorting medications and meal prepping. Every time I thought I might catch my breath, something else would fall apart. And yet, I stayed. I always stayed. Because love, I thought, was action, not words. But some nights, when the house was quiet and I was folding laundry at midnight, I'd wonder if anyone really saw me. If love meant they'd see me too. Once I overheard my mom on the phone, her voice low but clear. "You know," she said, "your brothers are the real legacy of this family." I froze. Not angry, just hollow. I smiled to myself, finished folding the towel, and thought, they'll understand one day, they'll see. Mornings always started the same. Coffee, strong and silent, while the house stirred slowly awake. I'd sit at the kitchen table flipping through their medical notes, pretending I wasn't tired, pretending I wasn't scared. The scent of toast, the hum of the fridge, the clink of pill bottles. These became my soundtrack. I'd smile when they came downstairs, ask how they slept, listen to the same stories I'd heard 100 times. And I meant it. I really did. But some days, I felt like a ghost in my own life. I missed birthdays, weddings, the chance to say yes to anything spontaneous. Friends stopped inviting me out, not out of cruelty, just practicality. They knew I'd say no. I started measuring my time in refills and appointments, in silent victories like getting through a week without a fall, a panic attack, or a late-night ER visit. People told me I was strong, brave even. But I didn't feel brave. I felt like a tired daughter trying to hold a world together with duct tape and hope. And still, even when they were sharp with me, even when my mother's words stung like paper cuts, I kept showing up. Because deep down, I believed that loyalty mattered. That being the dependable one meant something, that maybe, just maybe, they'd look back and see what I gave. Not for praise, but for recognition, for a place at the table not just as their caretaker, but as their daughter, their equal, their legacy too. It's funny how silence grows roots. You stop correcting the little things, the backhanded comments, the overlooked kindnesses. You let them slide, thinking there'll be time later. A moment when they'll see all the hours, the meals, the sacrifice. When they'll turn to you and say, "We couldn't have done this without you." I kept waiting for that moment, believing in it, telling myself, maybe tomorrow. One afternoon, after a long day of driving them to back-to-back appointments, I stood in the hallway, invisible. They didn't know I was there. My mother was on the phone again, her voice softer than usual, almost proud. "The boys," she said, "they'll carry the family name. They're the real legacy." I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just stood there, shoes still on, grocery bags in hand, and let the words sink like stones into my chest. Heavy. Familiar. I could have walked in and said something, demanded recognition. But what would that change? So I unpacked the groceries, cooked dinner, set the table. Same as always. My hands moved out of habit, but my mind was somewhere else. Somewhere quieter. I thought about all the times I held them through illness, soothed their fears, paid their bills with money I didn't really have. Wasn't that a legacy too? Later that night, while folding towels in the laundry room, I let myself smile. Not out of joy, out of clarity. I wasn't bitter. Not yet, just resolved. If they couldn't see me now, maybe they never would. But still, I held on to the tiniest thread of hope, the kind that lives in people like me. The ones who stay, the ones who give. I told myself, they'll understand one day. They'll see. And that was enough to keep going. For now. What I didn't know then was how quickly everything could shift. That love, no matter how deep, can be misunderstood. That sacrifice doesn't always look like strength to the people who benefit from it most. I thought I was building something, a legacy of my own maybe, but something was coming, something I hadn't seen, and it would change everything. It started with a phone call that didn't feel like trouble, not at first. "We'd like to have all the kids over," my father said. "There's something important we need to discuss." I thought maybe it was medical. Maybe they were planning ahead, finally ready to talk about long-term care. I even felt hopeful. Maybe they wanted to acknowledge what I'd done. So I cleaned the house, cooked their favorite soup, and tried not to get too far ahead of myself. Just be present, I told myself. Just listen. The day came, and the house filled with voices that hadn't echoed through it in years. My brothers arrived, one with a tight hug, the other with a bottle of wine and a distracted smile. They seemed uncomfortable, like guests in a hotel lobby, not the home we'd all grown up in. Still, I poured drinks, set out snacks, tried to smooth the tension like I always did. My mother took her seat at the head of the table. My father cleared his throat. And then everything changed. "We've updated the will," he said, his voice careful, as if rehearsed. "We wanted to be fair, to keep things simple." My chest tightened, but I nodded. "Okay, that's fine." I waited for the words that would make sense of everything, but instead I watched them slide a folder across the table. Inside, the house, the savings, the heirlooms, all of it going to my brothers. To me? A sentence scribbled in a legal tone, with gratitude for her support and strength. I didn't say a word. My mouth opened, then closed. My brothers looked away, one pretending to sip his drink, the other staring at the floor. Gratitude, strength, as if I'd been a nurse passing through, as if the years I gave were just appreciated, not lived, not felt. Something in me folded inward, not loud, not angry, just hollow, a slow unraveling, like thread pulled from a favorite sweater. I thought I understood sacrifice, but this was erasure. I kept my face still, the way you do when your heart splits in public and there's no polite way to break down. I could hear them talking, something about legal logistics, tax benefits, probate. The words floated around me like fog. I wasn't listening anymore. I was staring at my hands. These hands that had lifted my mother from the bathroom floor, that had changed dressings, signed checks, carried groceries, and wiped away tears they never knew I cried. My hands, empty. No one asked what I thought. No one paused to say, "This doesn't feel right." Even my brothers, who had the decency to look uncomfortable, stayed silent. I wondered if they'd expected this too. If they'd been told ahead of time, or if this was just as surprising to them, and they chose convenience over conscience. I searched their faces for a flicker of guilt. One gave me a weak smile. The other wouldn't meet my eyes. That told me everything. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table, tear that will in half, list every receipt, every appointment, every night I spent awake so they could sleep. But I didn't. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. So I nodded. Said thank you, like some loyal employee getting a plaque after 20 years of unpaid overtime. My voice didn't shake, but something inside me did. It wasn't just about money. It was something deeper, more permanent. What they took from me wasn't measured in dollars or square footage. It was the quiet dignity of being acknowledged. It was the simple, human need to matter, to belong. I had been the one holding this family together, and now I wasn't even in the frame. I smiled through it, told them I understood, and deep down, a new silence took root in me. Colder, sharper than before. Not the silence of endurance, the silence of someone who just woke up. I left before dessert. No one stopped me. No one followed me out. I walked to my car, the same one I'd driven to late-night pharmacies, to hospitals, to pick up groceries with coupons and a tight jaw. I sat behind the wheel, staring at the dashboard like it could explain something, like it might blink out an answer. Instead, I just sat there, listening to my own breath, slow and shallow. My body felt like it weighed more than the car itself. On the drive home, everything looked the same. The trees, the streetlights, the quiet hum of a neighborhood pretending nothing had changed. But something had. Something permanent. I wasn't just hurt. I wasn't just tired. I was erased. And that ache? It didn't come from losing an inheritance. It came from realizing that all those years, I was hoping for a kind of love that maybe never existed in the first place. Not for me. I pulled into my driveway, sat there with the engine off, and let the silence wrap around me. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just sat still, letting the betrayal settle like dust in an empty room. It's strange the way clarity arrives, not as a thunderclap, but as a whisper that says, you gave them everything, your time, your peace, your years, and now they had taken even your place in the family. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay there, eyes wide open, not haunted, but awakening. For the first time, I didn't feel obligated to fix anything. I didn't feel like covering for anyone. I felt the beginning of something I hadn't allowed myself in a long time. Stillness. A pause. And somewhere in that quiet, a single thought emerged, steady and calm. No more. The next morning, I didn't call to check in. I didn't send reminders for appointments or refill their prescriptions. I just stopped. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. I'd spent years being their safety net, catching every fall, fixing every mess. And now I let go of the rope. At first, they didn't notice. A missed voicemail here, a skipped grocery delivery there. But by day 3, the silence began to echo. I started keeping my phone on silent, not to punish anyone, but because I didn't owe them my constant availability anymore. I walked around my apartment like it belonged to me again. I opened the windows. I played music. I cooked for one and left the dishes in the sink. It felt strange at first, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. But with every quiet hour, I started to remember who I was before I became the person who fixed everything. They started calling more often, my mother leaving clipped messages, my father asking if I'd forgotten something. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because the truth was, they'd forgotten something first. They'd forgotten me. The real me. The woman who held everything together not out of duty, but out of love. And when they chose to overlook that, when they said gratitude was enough, they broke something they didn't even see was fragile. Meanwhile, I began to reclaim pieces of myself, one breath at a time. I opened an old notebook, one I hadn't touched in years, filled with sketches and ideas I'd always told myself I'd get back to someday. I made a list, not of chores or medications, but of goals. Things for me. Small things, honest things. I wasn't angry anymore. I was rebuilding, quietly, carefully, and for the first time in a long time, for myself. I didn't tell anyone right away, but I started tracking everything. Every dollar I'd spent on their care, every medical bill I'd paid from my own account, every prescription, every taxi to a late-night ER visit. I still had the receipts, the bank statements, the text messages confirming appointments I'd made. At first, it felt petty. But then I realized it wasn't revenge. It was record-keeping. It was accountability. Something they had never offered me. My lawyer was kind. She didn't ask why it took me so long, just listened, nodded, and helped me build the timeline. She said, "Most people don't think to do this until it's too late." I just smiled and said, "It's not too late." I wasn't chasing money. I was building a mirror, one they couldn't look away from. If they wanted to reduce me to strength, then I'd show them just how structured that strength could be. Documented, detailed, unshakable. At home, the quiet became sacred. I stopped flinching when the phone rang. I stopped checking in out of habit. I started saying no, not with guilt, but with peace. It was strange how liberating it felt to not rush in, to let things fall apart that weren't mine to hold anymore. The laundry, the appointments, the bills, they began piling up on their end. And I didn't pick up the pieces. I let them see what a day without me really looked like. And while they scrambled, I built. I took a course I'd put off for years. I started painting again, just for me. I even booked a weekend away. Alone, no explanations. I walked through a quiet town with a coffee in hand and no one to answer to. I looked at the sky and thought, this is what space feels like. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was mine. All mine. And that was more powerful than any inheritance they could have offered. Eventually, their silence cracked. My mother called 3 times in one morning, her voice more strained each time. My father sent a text. We need help. I stared at it for a while, feeling nothing. Not spite, not triumph, just distance. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. There's a difference. I didn't block them. I didn't lash out. I simply didn't respond, because they weren't calling for me. They were calling for the version of me they depended on, the one they dismissed. And the brothers? They faded right back into the fog they'd always lived in. One sent a group message offering to check in more often. The other said he'd see what he could do between business trips. I almost laughed. The same men who'd inherited everything now scrambling to figure out how to schedule a blood test or decode an insurance form. I watched from a distance as the empire they'd been handed began to crumble in their hands. Meanwhile, I kept building my case. Not out of vengeance, but out of principle. I gathered every statement, every document. My lawyer called it meticulous. I called it memory. A memory of years spent unseen, turned into facts that couldn't be ignored. There was a strange comfort in the numbers, a strange power in turning pain into something solid. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I had evidence, and for the first time, they would have to look at it. One night, alone in my apartment, I stood by the window, watching the city breathe in and out beneath me. The lights, the cars, the quiet hum of other people's lives moving forward. I whispered to myself, barely louder than a breath, if they thought I was invisible, I'll show them how loud silence can be. And I meant it, not as a threat, as a promise to myself. That from here on out, I would not disappear again. It didn't take long for things to unravel. Without the daily check-ins, the prescription refills, the quiet errands I used to run without anyone asking, the house began to slip. Missed doctor's appointments, unpaid bills stacking up on the counter, confusion growing into crisis. And still, they didn't call my brothers first. No, they called me. As if nothing had changed. As if the betrayal never happened. As if I should just resume my role like a light switch being flipped on. I answered, this time. My voice was calm, measured. I asked them what they needed, listened, took notes. But I didn't rush over. I didn't offer a solution. I didn't offer me. When my mother said, we really need you, I gently replied, I hear that, but I'm not available the way I used to be. There was a pause, that heavy silence where someone realizes their power no longer works. I didn't fill it for them. I let it echo. They asked if I could just take care of a few things. The insurance paperwork, the medication schedule, the bills. I said I could recommend a care coordinator, a paid one. I gave them numbers, contacts. I offered professionalism instead of devotion, structure instead of sacrifice. They didn't know what to do with that. My mother stammered something about family. My father mumbled about obligation, and I said, exactly, family, not staff. That same week, the lawyer sent the formal notice. A claim for reimbursement, line by line, every dollar I'd spent. Dates, documentation, a legal tone as cold and clean as a scalpel. I didn't draft it to hurt them. I drafted it because love without recognition isn't love, it's labor. I wasn't asking for favors. I was demanding acknowledgement. Not in words, not in flowers, but in action. For once, the weight of responsibility was being redistributed. When the lawyer's notice arrived, they called me. Not out of anger, but out of panic. My father's voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since I was a child. He asked if this was a mistake, if I meant to go this far. I told him gently that I hadn't gone far at all. I'd simply stepped back to where they had always assumed I stood. I could hear it then, the shift, the moment they realized I was no longer asking for a seat at the table. I was building one of my own. The brothers started to stir finally. One sent a long email about how complicated family can be and how maybe it's time we all sat down. The other texted to say he was blindsided and wished I'd just come to him first. I read the messages slowly, calmly, without flinching. These were the same men who sat in that room and watched everything be taken from me, who said nothing when I was handed gratitude like it was gold. And now? Now they wanted conversation. My mother asked if I'd come over. Just to talk. I told her we could talk anytime, with my lawyer present. There was a long pause. Then she asked, "Why are you doing this to us?" And I answered, "I'm not doing anything to you. I'm doing something for me." That distinction seemed to knock the air out of her. For once, they were on the other end of the plea. The ones asking. The ones hoping I'd make it easier. And I didn't. I wasn't cruel. I was kind and firm. I answered their questions. I explained the numbers. I offered referrals, alternatives, paths forward. But I never offered myself again. Because what they called punishment, I knew was just truth. And truth has a funny way of sounding like revenge when people have lived too long inside a lie. They weren't used to being held accountable, not by me, not by the one they thought would always stay soft. The hearing wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no tears. Just paperwork, signatures, timelines. My lawyer read through each document with precision, every word a reminder of what had gone unseen for too long. My brothers sat stiff, shifting in their chairs, their faces pale with the weight of receipts they didn't know existed. My parents looked smaller somehow, not fragile, just real, stripped of the myth I'd built around them to make all the sacrifice feel noble. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly. My heart wasn't pounding. My hands didn't shake. I looked right at them, at all of them, and said, "I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this to remind you who was really there." The words didn't land like a slap. They landed like silence. That sharp kind of quiet that lingers when something undeniable has been said. I didn't say more. I didn't need to. The truth had already filled the room. I walked out of that building taller than I'd felt in years. Not triumphant, just steady. There was no parade, no applause, just the sound of my shoes on the floor and the wind meeting me at the door. I thought about all the nights I'd cried alone, the days I'd waited for recognition, the years I gave them without condition. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. I was never invisible. They just weren't looking. I didn't hate them. I wasn't bitter. But I no longer belonged to that story, the one where I give and hope someone finally sees. That version of me had ended, quietly, permanently, and as I turned the corner toward home, I felt it, not just freedom, but direction, not just survival, but choice. There was still one thing left to do, one more page to write, and this time, it would have my name on it. In the weeks that followed, my parents tried to fix things. There were hesitant calls, offers to adjust the documents, soft apologies wrapped in guilt. My mother said, "We just want to make it right." But some things, once fractured, don't go back to how they were. And I wasn't looking for repairs. I wasn't looking to be reinstated into a family that had only valued me when I was silent and useful. I was building something different now, something mine. They wanted to change the will, include me this time, add my name where it had once been conspicuously missing. I listened, then declined, kindly, clearly. "I don't want it," I said. "Not anymore." They didn't understand. My father blinked hard, confused. My mother went quiet. But I had already grieved that version of belonging. I didn't want their house, their heirlooms, their late-stage redemption. What I wanted couldn't be inherited. It had to be created. So I made a request of my own. Through my lawyer, I had a clause written, one that would be included only if they insisted on restoring my portion. If they chose to leave something to me, it wouldn't come to me at all. It would go to a fund, a quiet place of shelter and dignity, a nonprofit for caregivers, a home for women like me, women who gave years and breath and tears in silence. The clause would read, "In honor of all daughters who are never seen." My lawyer called it poetic justice. I didn't see it that way. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, about saying with ink and intent that some legacies aren't about bloodlines or last names. They're about care, about who shows up, who stays, who carries it all, even when no one claps. I didn't want their money. I wanted meaning, and that was something I had finally learned how to give myself. The brothers didn't take it well. One called it dramatic, the other said it was an unnecessary statement. I didn't respond, because when you've spent years being disregarded, there's a certain power in no longer defending your choices. Let them squirm. Let them carry the silence I used to fill. They'd inherited the estate. Now they could inherit the mess, the paperwork, the caregiving. All the things they'd once believed came with no value. Now they'd learn just how heavy that gratitude really was. Within a month, they were knee-deep in logistics. The house needed repairs. The medical bills kept arriving. My parents required round-the-clock care. And suddenly, the inheritance didn't look so shiny. They reached out again, not with cruelty, but with confusion. "How did you manage all of this alone?" one of them asked. And for the first time, I didn't soften the truth. I said, "I managed it because no one else did." And that was the end of the conversation. Meanwhile, the fund was growing. Quiet donations came in from women I'd never met. Caregivers, daughters, sisters who had lived invisible lives like mine. Some sent notes. "Thank you for seeing us. Thank you for naming what we couldn't." It wasn't loud or public, but it was real. And in that space, I found something my family had never given me. Recognition. I didn't need a plaque or a portrait on a wall, just this ripple of shared truth. My parents tried once more, asking to meet, face to face. Not to argue, but to find closure. I agreed, but on my terms. No history lessons, no rewrites, just presence. I didn't go to accuse or rehash. I went to witness. To be seen. Not for what I gave, but for who I'd become. Strong not because I had to be, but because I chose to be. They wanted to leave a legacy. I already had. I walked into their home one last time. Everything looked smaller. The rooms, the furniture, even their voices. Time does that. It compresses the things we once thought were immovable. My mother sat in her chair by the window, my father beside her. They looked up at me not as their caregiver, not as their disappointment, not even as their daughter. Just as someone they didn't know how to name anymore. And strangely, that felt okay. I brought no anger with me, only peace. I sat beside my mother, took her hand gently, not because she deserved it, but because I did. She tried to speak, but the words caught. My father blinked back something he wouldn't call tears. I leaned in, kissed her forehead, and said softly, "Love isn't owed, but neither is loyalty when love is denied." Her eyes closed, not in pain, in recognition. Maybe for the first time. I stood up, calm and whole. There was nothing left to fix, no apology I needed to wring from their mouths. I didn't need them to see me anymore, because I had finally seen myself. Fully. And that was the kind of inheritance no paper could hold. I walked out with nothing in my hands and everything in my chest. Dignity, truth, freedom. Not the kind anyone gives you. The kind you earn when you stop asking for permission to matter. Outside, the sky was that soft kind of golden that only comes at the end of a long day. I didn't look back. Not out of bitterness, but because I was already facing forward. Toward a life I'd built not from inheritance, but from clarity. And in that final step, I realized I was never the forgotten heir. I was the author of my own legacy, written in quiet courage, and signed with love only where it was truly returned.